Welcome to the second episode of the Georgia Elections 2024 Guide. If you haven't seen our first episode, I recommend checking it out. We dive deep into the parties and the party system in Georgia. Today, we'll be covering some key developments shaping the current political landscape. First, the Georgian government has announced plans to create a new fund for NGOs. This comes on the heels of a controversy surrounding the Foreign Agents Law or Foreign Transparency Law that targeted NGOs with foreign funding. There's also Russian pressure on Abkhazia, a region central to Georgia's ongoing territorial conflict with Abkhazians and Russia. This pressure could have serious implications for the country's national security, particularly as tensions flare up during the election season. The way the issue plays out could shape public opinion on foreign policy and Georgia's relationship with both Russia and the West. Meanwhile, two U.S. congressional bills aim to keep Georgia on a Western path. One of them, the Megobari Act, applies diplomatic and economic pressure to ensure Georgia remains committed to its Euro-Atlantic trajectory. The Georgian Dream government has expressed concern, of course, over this bill and framing it as undue pressure from the U.S. Georgian Dream, the ruling party, has unveiled its candidate list for upcoming elections. The lineup is always closely watched as it reveals whether the party is bringing in new people or sticking with established figures. This could be a deciding factor in how voters perceive the party's readiness for the future. Additionally, there are two ongoing protests in the country that are not drawing attention. Workers at Evolution Gaming are on strike, demanding fair wages and better conditions, while protesters against the mining company Georgia Manganese have gathered in front of the parliament, protesting damages the company has inflicted on their housing and demanding fair compensation. Let's dive deeper into these topics, but first let's introduce everyone again. Gio, let's start with you.
Hello, my name is Georgian Elections, and I am a political science student in Tbilisi.
Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Gigantino. I also live in Tbilisi, originally from the US, and I'm a historian and co-host and co-producer of the podcast with SOPO, Reimagining Soviet Georgia.
Ravaz?
Hello, I am Ravaz Garanadze. I am a former student activist and currently one of the union leaders at the Solidarity Network, that's an independent union.
And I'm Sopo Japaridze, who's also the head of an independent union and also a researcher, writer for various topics like labor and social rights. And I'm also the co-host with Brian, Reimagining Soviet Georgia. So let's begin. Let's not bore anyone too much. Since we have to do a show, we're a little bit behind schedule because I had a crazy travel schedule. So we apologize. This video is actually late, but we will be back on time with our third video on Monday. Okay, Brian, let's start with you. Russia is applying pressure on Abkhazia. Tell us more about
that. So for months and months now, there's been a little bit of rumors that have been spreading in the Georgian news sphere about the possibility of rapprochement between Tbilisi and Moscow, resulting in Moscow pressuring or coming to some deal with Tbilisi over the territories which are still conflictual, and the Georgian government believes it is a rightly integral part of Georgia, and the Russian government has recognized them as independent since the aftermath of the 2008 Russo-Georgian War. Recently, there has been more and more pressure that has been applied by Moscow onto the Abkhaz government based in Sukhumi. And recently, as of September 1st, the Russian Federation has withdrawn all funding that it gives to this Abkhaz, which, of course, the Russian government recognizes as independent, and the Georgian government recognizes as occupied, has withdrawn all funding. And that is actually still in power as of today. but since September 1st, it came into power. And there's been a lot of tensions that have led to this moment. Obviously, I think to the outside observer, people kind of view Abkhazia as being this state which has no room for independent political maneuvering, thought, or ideas, but the actual reality is very different. The Abkhaz tend to have a back and forth push and pull relationship with the Russian Federation on a number of issues. And over the past year or so, things have actually gotten a lot more tense. The Russians demanded higher prices for gas. They and more recently, it has gotten even more tense. And what has led to the recent cessation of funding was, first and foremost, a few months ago, there was a lot of public discontent in Abkhazia around what was called an apartment law. And this apartment law was a law that was trying to be brought into power by the ruling clique in Abkhazia that would have allowed for the building, the facilitation of the building and the purchasing of mini hotels and apartments by Russian citizens. Which locals in Abkhazia protested because they said that this was going to give undue leverage to Russian investors, potentially in eastern parts of the country, in eastern parts of Abkhazia. And so there was huge protest and then was withdrawn. But that wasn't the only part of tension. The next step was the Abkhaz president, Aslan Bjania, was in a meeting in Moscow, and some of the information from this meeting in Moscow appeared on Abkhaz social media, which suggested that the Russians were pressuring him to try to get the opposition MPs in Abkhazia in line to more closely align with the interests of Moscow in Abkhazia. And that this was then Bjania's duty to try to kind of get them in line, and then there was a big response to that. And one of the aspects of this, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then we can open it up for a discussion, is that there was this agreement of mutual recognition of judicial and arbitration decisions, which is a very important part of it, which the Russian Federation was trying to get the Abkhaz government to agree to, where they could basically align the Abkhaz and Russian kind of like legal systems more. And there was pushback in Abkhazia from this. So for our purposes, the important thing is that one aspect of the election cycle is that Georgian Dream has been talking about not only joining the European Union in 2030, but also joining the European Union with Georgia's quote unquote territorial integrity intact. So right now what we're seeing is that as part of the election cycle, Abkhazia and South Ossetia are becoming part of it as saying that, you know, our policy of peace, our policy of sort of strategic negotiations with the Russians is going to allow us essentially to reincorporate these territories. Whether or not that is actually true, how does Moscow see it, how does Sukhumi see it, is maybe a different question. But that's where we're at right now. Do you guys have any thoughts or comments?
I think I could start with a comment. I think that in the recent years, the Georgian Dream Party got more proactive when it comes to issues like Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And we definitely see a change of policy, especially change of policy from what the United National Movement government used to do. This approach that Georgian Dream has, it's definitely much slower. And more importantly, it's also careful. They understand that these rash decisions that the UNM used to make just hurt Georgia and hurt, you know, the eventual cause of reconciliation. And instead, what we see is that the Georgian Dream is more successful in this regard. For example, we have the fact that UNM, since the 2004, so when they got in power, they started, you know, worsening the relationship with Abkhazian and South Ossetian governments. They closed down a trade village with Ossetia, Ergnati village, which was a main hub and a connection point for Ossetians and Georgians. They closed it down and the tensions arose, and then eventually we had the 2008 war. The Georgian Dream never does a thing like that. And I think it is a thought out policy, because even in 2022, so like 2 years ago, then Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili was talking about how there will be a peaceful reconciliation between Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and that they're planning to invest $10 billion over the course of 3 years into Abkhazia. Now, this might be, the $10 billion thing might be exaggerated, but we see lots of statements like this, and I don't think that it's just, populist approach to just get votes. And instead of all the chaos, we have rumors that GDP is actually planning to establish a confederation between South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and Georgia. Now, this rumor was started by the Joa party, so we don't really know how correct it is. But interestingly, the Abkhazian community itself is extremely torn on Georgian Dream. On the one side, we have this like extremely secessionist, separatist Abkhazian people who are very afraid of Georgian Dream because they see that Georgian Dream is actually making positive strides. And on the other side, we have more centrist Abkhazian, like regular people who remember their connections with the regular Georgian people, and they don't mind either reconciliation or friendly relationship or even a unity nation, and they actually like Georgian Dream. It kind of surprised me how popular Georgian Dream is outside of, Georgia proper into Abkhazia. And more importantly, because this is an election show, I think this topic is one of the most heartfelt topic for Georgian people, especially those Georgians who are refugees from Abkhazia. Mostly Migralians lived in Abkhazia and they had to flee because of the civil war. And I don't know, there are like hundreds of thousands of refugees who fled from Abkhazia, and those people are especially very sensitive to this subject. And Georgian Dream's careful and slow approach actually is quite in line with what the Georgian refugees, the Migralian refugees want, and the Abkhazian people who live in Abkhazia. So I think this is one of the more successful campaigns that the Georgian Dream has, and it might actually win them a lot of votes in this upcoming elections, and maybe in the future as well.
Yeah, I think this the Russian invasion of Ukraine has opened up new possibilities and constraints at the same time, because everyone's sort of cleaning house, looking for new allies, formulating, and a lot of these frozen conflicts since the end of collapse of the Soviet Union are now being given resolutions, right? Not sure exactly what each resolution will look like, but there's definitely now some movement. But I found it also interesting because the opposition, like, they're completely defined by, 20% of my country is occupied by Russia. Like, this is their only saying, really. The entire politics is around this in every possible way. And so now they're blatantly against it. So they're blatantly against Georgian Dreams, if these things are true, of course, because none of this is actually written down and we don't really know a lot of these, what's really happening. But if Georgian Dream pulls this off and is able to have some kind of, resolution on Abkhazia, it will be very, very interesting what their politics will be like afterwards, because that is the only thing they have, that and loving free markets, right? Like being pro-business. So huge possibilities going on right
now. Can I add something? So regarding this topic, I find it really interesting that Georgian side, or at least the opposition, the narrative is that the other side is always considered Russia, whereas the Abkhazians and Ossetians are always negated from the picture, like they do not exist. And that's, for me, is a huge problem if you try to do the reconciliation. How are you going to do the negotiation process without just recognizing that these entities, these peoples at least exist, the people who live there exist, right? It's not just Russia. Therefore, now Russia is seen as a mediator from the Abkhaz side. This is how I see it. It's seen as a third party that can change the sides, because Abkhaz and Ossetians are also looking at Nagorno-Karabakh, what happened in Azerbaijan, between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and how Karabakh conflict was basically resolved in 100% favor of Azerbaijan at the end of the day. So Russia basically changed its sides from Armenia to Azerbaijan because of the political amendments within Armenian politics, and also the general geopolitical picture, considering Turkey-Azerbaijan relations, and also BRICS, and also, of course, the 2022 Russia-Ukraine war. Therefore, I agree with you, there are a lot of new possibilities, and these frozen conflicts look less and less frozen by day.
I would add one more thing, is that the Georgian Dream doesn't really talk about it as much as I think they should. But maybe it's really a strategy that they're just doing it slowly and carefully so that, you know, it will not cause a lot of disturbance in the society. But I also saw from like I was watching some videos of Georgian Dream politicians having like smaller interviews with niche media outlets, and there was some either a rumor or a possibility of Georgian Dream planning to put peaceful reconciliation into the constitution, so it will become a constitutional norm. And I think out of all the proposed Georgian Dream constitutional changes, this is the one that I would definitely support. But we'll have to see that if they will actually get, you know, a constitutional majority. But if they will actually put it, and if they're actually planning to do that, that's probably one of the best things that they can do at this very moment.
You don't support all the anti-homosexual agenda points. Okay, any other comments? All right, let's move on to the NGO fund, Gio.
Okay, yeah, I'll start. So it really happened a couple of days ago when Prime Minister of Georgia, Abkhazia, announced that the government has decided to establish a new fund for Georgian NGOs. And through this fund, the state will give money and grants to NGOs for specific projects. He noted that Georgian NGOs that do commendable work will be able to get 2 and 3 times more funding from the government than they are right now receiving from foreign donors. Additionally, the Prime Minister argued that this program will be the most transparent NGO funding program, and that now the NGOs will truly serve the Georgian people because they will be funded through the taxpayer money. Now, one precondition for applying for this grant is registering in the Foreign Influenced Entity Registry. In Georgia, we have over 10,000 NGOs registered, and out of them, I think over 3,000 of them are operational. For comparison, in Armenia, there's only less than 1,000 that is operational, and in Azerbaijan, even though it's a bigger country, more than like Georgia and Armenia combined together, they have the least amount of NGOs. So out of all these NGOs, only 450 registered at the Justice Hall. And the rest are right now boycotting the law, as we talked about it in the previous episode. So this raised some concerns in the opposition. The main argument we hear amongst the opposition is that it is very ironic that the government would fund the NGOs because that would negate the fact that it's a non-government organization. Now, this is just flat out false, I have to say, because almost in every nation we have some kind of program by the state to fund the NGOs. In fact, in Georgia, we already have state-funded NGOs, except these state-funded NGOs are foreign state-funded. So why does it really matter if Georgia will have foreign state-funded NGOs or locally state-funded NGOs, or both for that matter? And I don't really have to explain to outside observers how the Western governments and parties already fund the NGOs, because it's a known practice, it's a standard procedure. Almost every nation, especially in the West, USA, UK, Germany, Sweden, they all do it. In the USA, we also have NGOs that are funded by the parties, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or bipartisan funding. For example, NAD, which is quite prominent in Georgia as well. But we saw this year that whatever is accepted and is allowed for the Western governments to do, it is not allowed for us to do. So this is the main issue here. Now, I can also understand that some people might say that this might endanger the independence of NGOs. But to be very frank, most NGOs are not independent. So we can't really lose something that we don't have. I think the bigger question is it a prudent choice, and will the Georgian budget be able to cover such costs? Because when we talk about the NGOs that work in Georgia, they're very well funded, especially the more opposition-minded, politicized NGOs. They don't get like a couple of thousands of dollars. If they would get a couple of thousands of dollars per year, then there would not be a problem for Georgian Dream, and they would not go after them. The fact is that they receive hundreds of thousands of dollars, and such costs for budget definitely will not go well. And I really doubt that Georgian Dream is actually planning to fund those NGOs. I think that there will be like a final conflict between them, because I really don't think that Georgian Dream wants to spend that much money on organizations that oppose them that much. So yeah, the budgetary constraint will definitely be one thing, especially considering the fact that the Georgian Dream is going on this like populist streak. They're funding the church way more than they used to. The funding may go up to 100 million lari with this trend that is going on. And considering the fact that the church already is exempt from taxes and all that, I think we should cover that in a separate episode. But yeah, this is a very, very big topic. More importantly, this policy doesn't really change the old tradition of Georgian governments just outsourcing their responsibilities to NGOs. And I think this is a very big issue in Georgia, because a lot of those responsibilities should and must be provided by the state. Whether it's GD or some other political entity, it doesn't really matter. And I think that outsourcing such responsibilities is not only weakening the government and the state, but it's not really helpful, and it's not really as cost effective as Georgian liberal academia and political spheres or overall really usually claim. Now, I understand why the government would outsource very niche and small responsibilities to take some burden off of the state, because again, the budgetary constraint is real. But some Georgian NGOs are involved in very huge sectors such as education and healthcare. Now, why should it be NGOs' prerogative to teach the Georgian language to ethnic minorities who live in Georgia? They usually praise a project like this as like miracle work. But for me, it's always disturbing that NGOs can easily just capture what is essentially a state level responsibility and basically act like a government that is in fact fully independent of the actual elected government. But I guess overall, I'm just not really that against this program. I think it should be for smaller grassroots organizations that actually help the people and help to create a civil society culture in Georgia. But we'll see how it will play out later. Now, I don't think that this decision will actually influence the voters, because voters don't care about the NGOs here. They don't care if they will be state funded. They don't care if they will be not funded at all. I think this is more a power play between the Georgian Dream and the opposition-minded NGOs. So yeah, do you guys have any comments?
Brian, did you want to speak?
I'll just say something brief. I think it's one of the important aspects to maintain is that to keep in mind, is that the problem with the model of Georgia's NGO sector is that it not only did everything you said, Gio, about undermining the capacity of the state while maintaining the position that it's actually like helping the state be more effective, right? So it does both at the same time, like undermines its capacity while saying we're here to discipline the state. The big issue that I see right now is a little bit is different, but complements what you said, which is that there's also the NGOs sector, the civil society sector, has an implicit like geopolitical orientation that is very restricting, and so it's always mobilized in a geopolitical terms, and that's because that was the original intention. As we know, when the NGO sector became essentially state ministries under the UNM government, one of the reasons, Saakashvili and his administration openly discussed this, and I think Georgian Dream inherited this dynamic, was to say that the NGO sector was to like maintain Georgia on its Western course, on its Euro-Atlantic course, on its like Euro-Atlantic integration. So when the state is put in a position where it sees its need for maneuver as being something different, as being something which disagrees with the leadership of Euro-Atlantic institutions, well, then the NGO sector and its geopolitical orientation become a huge problem. So I think that that's one of the reasons why the state has this imperative to say, like, we need to like depoliticize the NGOs in a specific way, especially when it comes to like geopolitics and state sovereignty to negotiate different issues.
Yeah, I also think one of the demands should have been all these buildings that are left in the, rotting or closed up for years should be given to civil society people, like give it to for social purposes. Like they have, like in Naples, like as an example I use all the time, there were all these empty buildings and the mayor gave them different organizations buildings to use for social causes. I think that would be amazing if we could have that, more than I would say even this fund, because space and rents, and it's also a really huge amount of money that requires that you have to pay, especially with gentrification and so on. I think just a lot of things could have been, for me, like, just this transparency law could have been better in the sense that I think, lobbyists should have been included. I think business should have been included. I think free, buildings and like spaces for people should have been included. Community centers should have been included, and so on. So the critique of the entire process, could have just been more, for us, a left-wing perspective, which would have been not only don't vilify, as agents and so on, even though the language is, still, I think, pretty divisive. We could have had these kinds of demands. We definitely need them. We know that if you don't have NGO, if you don't get foreign grants, you're gonna have a really hard time getting a space, having rent, having a permanent space to go to all the time. People get busy, they need jobs, so on, they move on from things. So anyway, many things could have been improved on that. And I 100% agree that the neoliberal state needs to be over. The state needs to take over its purpose, state functions, and should not be outsourced to NGOs, which are always not cost effective. What NGOs can serve is a tiny number of people, while the state has resources to be able to serve way more people. And it's also this thing I hate as well. We have this in behavioral therapists, they take state money, give it to private providers, who then will get employees. So the money keeps dwindling down. Where the state could have done that. They could have provided the behavioral therapy and done it cheaper, done it better, with less overhead costs and higher wages for the therapists. So I don't see huge changes in the future, but these are some of the things that I think we should be demanding. Any other comment, Rezi? Because I'm going to move on to the congressional bills.
Yeah. Because it's really interesting that, as you said, we're talking about the cost effectiveness and how this neoliberal structure that has been imposed upon most of the post-Soviet states, especially Georgia, and how all the successive governments have been implementing this formula of like the withdrawal of state from most of the spheres of life that we have. We have actually seen how cost effectiveness didn't work in healthcare. That is a topic for a different whole show, I would say. But that's a very interesting topic, how privatization of the healthcare actually didn't really benefit not the patients, neither the patients nor the healthcare workers, and how we see absolute depreciation in the number of the healthcare workers that are fleeing from the country and from the profession. This is a structural problem because these non-governmental organizations have been actually officially trying, especially in social and economic spheres, trying to take the place where the government is not active any longer. And that is a biggest concern for me and from my perspective, because if you want to develop a country and the country needs to have more economic prosperity or social social prosperity, it is impossible for the country to rely on these NGOs. And from Shevardnadze to Saakashvili and to Georgian Dream's governments, all three governments have been very much dependent on the non-governmental organizations. And the non-governmental organizations have become sort of experts and fields of experts. If the government wanted to pass any new bill or any new regulation, the non-governmental organizations were sort of elite scholars and have been attending most of the parliamentary or commission discussions, and therefore they were very much popular within this framework. And also during the Georgian Dream government, from my perspective and what I've lived through, is that they have become the strongest under Georgian Dream and most visible as well during this government, who now introduced this bill that unfortunately failed to also include the lobbyists, because some of the non-governmental organizations, we should not forget, are actually lobbyists. And we've seen that non-governmental organizations in 2016, when Georgian Dream had the constitutional majority and had the power to amend neoliberal Article 94, non-governmental organizations like Transparency International directly intervened and sided with the business. So basically they have been portrayed as pro-business, right-wing non-governmental organization that is there, and that must be taken into consideration. But I think we should discuss this very issue later when we go and dissect the politics of the Georgian Dream itself.
I could have one
Yeah.
more comment.
Yeah.
Because it's like a very key issue, I think, that the Georgian political mindset really hasn't moved from this neoliberal indoctrination. Because what is the biggest talking point that the opposition has? That there will be corruption if there will be this kind of government program. And this is a talking point that they do for any kind of social policy. Whether, for example, will there be a free healthcare? Oh no, there will be corruption in that. Will we have progressive taxation? Oh no, there will be corruption in that. Should the state inspect hospitals and restaurants and businesses? Oh no, there will be corruption in that. Well, guess what? In any kind of program, whether public or private, corruption will be there, but it doesn't mean that suddenly the state should strip itself of all responsibilities and just do nothing about it, because doing nothing is actually more hurtful than doing something with just little bit of corruption. Because USA has corruption, UK has corruption, all of those model nations that these parties have corruption, but they still manage to do some of these programs. Why shouldn't Georgia do it? And and it also frames as if the reason why Georgia is falling behind is because of corruption. As if if we rooted out corruption in Georgia, suddenly we would have this amazing state. No, the problem in Georgia is much deeper than just couple of government officials being corrupt and just taking more money or taking bribes or something like that. The problem is systematic. It's with neoliberalism. It's not just corruption. And this talking point has been used to basically destroy the government in a sense that it just strips the government power of its responsibilities. So yeah, I think this is very important to highlight.
One anecdote that one of the health ministers, former health ministers we interviewed, said the way that they got rid of corruption with doctors was when they used to take bribes, money for operation and surgery and whatever. Now they just made it into a fee. So what was before voluntary to give, now it's mandatory, and it's called a service fee, So that's how they deal with corruption. And then one is corrupt and one is not, right? So in general, this idea of corruption is a way to actually keep people getting social services and having a social state. That's why Transparency International and Transparent Georgia is well known to be a fighting force against any kind of social state, which I will discuss in a little bit. Well, because the head of Transparency Georgia was in the U.S. recently, giving testimonies to the U.S. Foreign Relations Committee. Okay, so let's go to the U.S. What's happening there? There has been 2 different bills put forth to, supposedly to help Georgia. One of them is called Megobari Act. Megobari means friend in Georgian, but it stands for, it's an acronym, Mobilizing and Enhancing Georgia's Options for Building Accountability, Resilience, and Independence Act. So this has gotten a lot of traction in Georgia. Another one's called Georgia People's Act. They were both introduced about a month apart, May and June. The Megobari Act has 17 sponsors. The Georgia People's Act has 2 sponsors. And it was introduced by Joe Wilson, who is now in the hospital, who has stroke-like symptoms. So he may not even be able to carry out his duties, which I found slightly ironic. Even the head of Transparency Georgia, Ekagi Gauri, mentioned, and she urged the Senate Foreign Relations to pass these bills. These bills are literally crazy, I think. Let me just read some of the passages for you. The Megobari Act. So it's first like asserting certain things, and then it's saying what they should impose. There's a sort of carrot and stick method, The current government, the current Georgian government has increasingly and regrettably embraced a policy of accommodation with the Russian Federation as an aspect of its increasingly illiberal turn, has openly attacked the United States and other Western democracy promotion organizations as well as local and international civil society, while embracing increased ties with Russia in particular, as well as China and other authoritarian governments, in defense of its own pre-existing foreign and security policies, in defiance, of its own pre-existing foreign and security policies as reflected in its constitution and long-standing public sentiments. The current Georgian government is increasingly hostile towards democracy promotion organizations, independent civil society, and its chief Euro-Atlantic partners, while increasingly embracing enhanced ties with the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, and other anti-Western authoritarian regimes. If this bill gets passed, within 90 days, they have to do a report of foreign influence in Georgia that serves Russian interests, make a list of all the people who have evaded Western sanctions against Russia and the extent of how Georgia is captured by Russia, and a report on Russian intelligence assets. Then they will impose sanctions on Georgian government and all of the agents or so-called members who are working on behalf of Russia, have material responsibility for undermining or injuring democracy, human rights, so on. And then while these reports are being made, they will be publicly available for all to denounce the, American-sponsored foreign agents of Georgia. I found this funny because both of these bills are pretty much the foreign agent laws, but coming from the outside, literally both of these bills have similar nature in that they're going to set up a democracy monitoring task force in Georgia. The Secretary of State, in coordination with the Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, heads of other federal agency, will establish a monitoring task force to publicly assess, monitor, and promote the pre-election democratic environment in Georgia. If you can imagine, they want to. None of these things are actually going to get passed. I'm pretty sure about that. But this is just a scare tactic. But still, a task force that will be stationed here, checking on the elections. It's kind of unbelievable. And the carrots are, if we do all this, then we'll give preferential treatment to trade, shall develop policy package to further enhance people-to-people contact, academic exchanges, improved visa liberalization, improved. They didn't say like visa liberalization. And then economic development, modernizing package for Georgia, and so on. So, and my favorite was like, I looked at it and they're like, the Congress, the Congressional Budget Office hasn't even done any kind of cost estimate of how much this would cost. And the fact that one of the sponsors is no longer actually even in Congress and Joe Wilson's actually like in the hospital just shows that this is actually not a real viable bill, is a way to sort of scare Georgians who don't know. And then of course the opposition channels just air these like bills like they're actually real, because none of the no one who actually does know how the US government works are willing to tell people what it's like there and what does this mean. The Georgia People's Act also has only 2 sponsors, and it has all this, and it's clearly some Saakashvili. I haven't checked the lobbyists, but kind of has that Saakashvili feel, because one of the things it says that US is telling Georgia to do is to free all political prisoners, which we know who that is. And so Misha's lobby is in literally everywhere in the US and the EU. And so they're like, Bitina attacked the US and Europeans and so on and so on. And then this one also says that let's do a report and about all the foreign influenced people and all their family members. And it's like this really strict, like remove visas if they have visas, all of their families, anybody who was involved in leadership positions during law enforcement, so like cops, and really like wild level of kind of the sanction list. But again, these look like they're not moving. Sorry, I have to change this out again.
This always happens when I have to speak, like during my times when all of my things start like dying.
Well, should I say something while you're switching your mic?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of, a couple of things I want to say, which is that one of the ironies is that sometimes this, the US is going through a crisis in the global system of, US hegemony is declining. Doesn't mean the US is going to collapse, but I mean the US's relative political status and this rising multipolarity is shifting US role in the world. And what we're seeing happen in Georgia is not only competition between the US and China, but one thing that is very clear by the US administration's response to the Georgian Dream government's desire to relitigate the terms of the relationship with the United States is that they are doing things which are undermining their own standing in Georgia. And this is the thing that is very interesting to me and something we have to watch, which is that the United States is actually pushing the Georgian Dream government to take an even stronger line because of the fact that they're applying this external pressure onto the Georgian Dream government at a time when it's very clear that ties with the United States in Eurasia and in this post-Soviet space are becoming more of a liability than a strength. So whatever one thinks about Georgia-American ties, if you were interested in maintaining Georgian-American ties, you would think that the US would take a very much more quiet, sober, and basically less aggressive approach. But in fact, what this shows is that they're much more concerned about geopolitical competition with China and Russia than they are about the Georgian people or the concerns about Georgian democracy, which is a huge problem. And this is actually what got Georgia into problems before.
The biggest issue for me is that I feel very much disrespected. And I think this is very disrespectful to Georgian people because they see us some sort of people that are brainwashed or who can be manipulated just like that. I'm very sorry, but we are a country that has a history and culture that is way much older, not just the United States and its settler colonial ancestors, but also the white European empires that have risen and been annihilated from the earth. I'm very, very angry because United States rhetoric is still very much hawkish and disrespectful, not to just Georgia, but generally, if you look how they act against the countries of the Middle East, against the countries of East Asia. This is a pure imperialism one-on-one. And I am extremely, extremely bothered and angry when someone like these senators, Rishi and others, are going to have hearings for their own finance lobbyists, like Gauri and Transparency International, talking about the situation and talking about the researches or the polls that they themselves have funded and will fund. It is utmostly stupid from the United States to be this aggressive. Their actions are stupid and aggressive at this very moment. And I think if they push further, what they will have is they will end up losing an ally in the Caucasus region. And the only thing they will have to rely on geopolitically would be Armenia and Pashinyan's government to hold.
So the Foreign Relations Committee had a hearing around this NGO laws, and they had like different speakers, but they had Gauri from Georgia. And this was yesterday, I believe. I watched some of it, I haven't finished the whole thing, who spoke in the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm like, yeah, every time I want to prove I'm not, foreign influence, I go to the Foreign Relations Committee, hearing, denouncing the Georgian government. And it's really preposterous. So anyway, she speaks about, and she represents herself as a human rights defender of Georgia. And I'm really confused. What human rights does Eka defend? She works for Transparency Georgia, whose whole mission is to make sure we don't have progressive taxation, that it's illegal, and all these things against so-called corruption we just discussed, and Gio put beautifully. So what human rights defending is this? Why does she represent herself like that? And it was great, because they were one of the senators was says Russia interfering in Georgia, and starts with, we all know how Russia likes to interfere in different countries. And I'm with no irony that they're interfering in other people's countries themselves, right? And they're can you give us an example of how are they interfering in Georgia? And Eka's oh, well, Russians praised the NGO foreign agent law, and they found 60 accounts, which was praising this NGO law, and they were coming from the Russian territory. Really? This is your big evidence that somehow Russian interference was happening? I mean, it's preposterous. And she doesn't even get grilled or questioned more about this, because it's not evidence whatsoever. 60 made up, fake accounts on Facebook on Russian territory, And so, I don't know, the whole thing was a joke. And then Rish was we're going back, they're trying to drag Georgia into communism, socialism, that's what Russia is, a socialist or communist country. And allegedly we're all going back to the Soviet Union. I mean, it's, I don't know how to even talk about this, because it's how low of an education, how dishonest can you be to frame this like that?
Yeah, I just want to agree. I want to agree with you.
Go ahead.
I want to agree. No, I just want to agree with you. It's really actually sad to watch, because of how, you just said, ideological and not very serious the whole thing was. But I want to bring up one thing, which is that, I don't think that these people, the people who are trying to constantly determine how to call the Georgian Dream government a pro-Russian government are actually opposed politically to Georgia and Russia coming to any kind of terms of peace and terms of normalization. And even the Georgian Dream government, which we all know is not sympathetic in their hearts of hearts to Russia in any real way, are searching for a kind of normalization or path towards normalization, not only to resolve, as we talked about earlier, Abkhazia, South Ossetia territorial disagreements, but also to benefit economically. And so they constantly, what's been striking to me is that the same actors in the West who constantly pushed in an earlier period for Georgia to be more willing and open for a peaceful resolution with Russia are now acting as levers of pressure to undermine the benefits that Georgia is receiving from actually moving closer towards some kind of normalization process. And I think that they use the opposition, instrumentalize the interests of the opposition for those purposes of undermining that kind of longer, medium-term normalization process. And again, it's very interesting how Georgia is not an anti-Western state or a pro-Russian state, and yet still being accused of doing what all of these Western states themselves do. We all know that all these Western states are still doing deals and business with Russia. We all know that they're benefiting from deep ties with China, yet Jim O'Brien has the audacity to say that Georgia is moving in an authoritarian direction because it's deepening ties with China.
I mean, to be honest, as Sopo said, like what was the evidence? But I'm very sorry, but like growing up a person that lived through the Iraq War without any evidence, United States Congress has authorized the illegal occupation of Iraq that cost 1 million people to die. I don't think they would need any real evidence in order to show that there is any Russian influence within the country. So the idea that they would present any real evidence, even though there is none, actually, what Sopo said, it's not the matter of reality, it's the matter of the objective that they have and how they perceive it. It's the matter of American geopolitical interests, that is neoconservative geopolitical interests, in order to defend it. Therefore, I think they will do everything what they see fit in order to prevent, as Brian was saying, Georgia and Russia having any meaningful negotiation or anything meaningful to start de-escalation of the situation within the Caucasus region, especially with Georgia, Abkhazia, and Georgia, Ossetia. And I won't even be surprised that suddenly the United States would start supporting the separatist regions. Well, United States that claims that it should always support the territorial integrity. We saw how United States has supported separatists in Serbia and Kosovo. And we also see currently how the United States is supporting the Taiwanese separatists when it comes to People's Republic of China. So if the United States wants to talk about the territorial integrity, then we all know United States talks about it when it fits its geopolitical interests. So we shouldn't be surprised that Washington might start defending the self-determination of Abkhazians if there's any real chance that Georgia and Russia start de-escalation of their relations, and there is any movement forward to this. And I don't think they need any evidence. They will just make it up. Oh, there's an authoritarianism coming. And how stupid and beyond undereducated you are to say that Georgia is moving to Russia, that is a communist or a socialist state. Russia is even more neoliberal in certain aspects than this neoliberal libertarian experiment that we call Georgia today, that I've lived for 30 years now. That is preposterous at best.
Okay, for time's sake, we need to move on. Unless, Gio, did you want anything to say quickly?
Maybe just a quick comment.
Yeah.
Because when you talked about Agori and Transparency International Georgia, I remembered one small fact that I was researching when I was writing an article about it. It's just so crazy that Transparency Georgia is talking about foreign influence when they just this year have received over €500,000 euros in funding from, I think it was Denmark, but I'm not sure exactly, which is in Georgian lari, it's like 1.5 million lari. So it's crazy that they talk about it. And it's just this bill, both of these bills, like People's Act and Megobari Act, it's just kind of scary even because when you go into the clauses that they talk about how they'll monitor everybody who works in law enforcement, and they'll sanction them for their either like work or political views. It's like a state secret police, but the state secret police is not national state secret police. It's like a foreign state secret police that is operating in Georgia, which is like really crazy because you have no leverage to work against them because it's like US. And this is a unfortunately like a very controversial thing to say that US is indeed a foreign state. I don't know why Georgians pretend that some like Georgian opposition people pretend that US is not a foreign state. It's a foreign state. Whether you think US is an ally or an enemy or somewhere in between, it still doesn't change the fact that it's a foreign state. And this foreign state is regulating and monitoring what Georgian police officers think about certain laws, really, and then putting sanctions on them based on their political views or their work, which is crazy, especially considering the fact that they didn't put any kind of sanctions on the previous government, which actually had human rights abuses. That's
It's really funny because in the Georgian People's Act, they also have definitions of every term they use within the bill. They define it. And one, it says like foreign, and it says everyone who's not a US citizen is who they mean. So it's like, and I thought that was funny because like, there's been like, what do you mean foreign? You know, like they mean literally like friendly or unfriendly. It doesn't matter. It's foreign, not a US citizen, not a US, you know, whatever. And so I love that the response to the foreign influence law in Georgia has been to propose only Russian Chinese influence counter. So we should then, instead of including Western Europe or US, that foreign should be only defined by Russia and China when it comes to Georgia, even though in the US, foreign means everyone, including Denmark or whatever tourism, could be like Swedish tourist company, and they're still registered under Foreign Agents Act, right? So I love like no one's like willing to even go into how crazy all of this is. And they make it seem like this is normal. This is not normal. This is not logically coherent, you know? Okay, we really should move on. Next topics. So let's discuss the two protests that are going on. And then we will end with Revaz giving us the Georgian Dream Party list and also their economic approach. So maybe one of you want to discuss the Evolution Gaming, or do you want me to do it?
You can start and we can do the comments.
Okay.
Probably that better.
So I'm not sure how many days Evolution Gaming has been going on though. 75,
around,
right?
It's more than 2 months. It's more than 2 months already.
So Evolution Gaming is a online casino. It's a Swedish company that is in Georgia. And the workers, they're mostly young workers who work in these online casinos, have gone on strike more than 2 months ago. I cannot say how many people are still on strike now, but there's also an addition of a hunger strike that has started about, I think like, I want to say a month ago. So this was right after the huge protests ended against the foreign influence law. I believe there was this, let's say, wishful thinking on the part of the union that is organizing these Evolution Gaming workers, that some of the energy from the protests would then drift to the Evolution Gaming, and that young people would be willing to fight for young people's workers' rights in Georgia. Unfortunately, the workers that have stuck till the end striking and hunger striking against this Swedish company have been very lonely. Not that many people have gone to support them besides a lot of the usual suspects, usual activists and so on. That energy do not transfer to any kind of social rights. So another protest we'll also discuss is Shukruti, which is a village close to where Georgia Manganese has a mine. Well, the mine is before them, but it's actually a Ukrainian oligarch owns the mine that uses a American shell company to position itself as an American company. And also they have been protesting, sewing their lips, which is a really drastic form of protest in Georgia. And they just came to the parliament 2 days ago in Tbilisi, in the capital. They came from Western Georgia to the capital to protest. They want compensation for their houses being damaged by the mining, the drilling, and so on. They've transformed all these like villages and this town into just like open mining. It is really like horrific what's happening there. Again, not a lot of support. That energy, most of these NGO leaders, Ekadigauri types and so on, they don't care about workers. They don't care about, going against companies. They definitely don't want to go against a Swedish company. They definitely don't want to go against, allegedly an American company. I'll even go farther than that. When I went to Chigaturam and I was saying that Georgia manganese should be nationalized, we had some opposition politicians who were arguing against us, saying that this was an anti-Ukrainian move to take away from the Ukrainian oligarch their mine, their property. So they looked at this, geopolitical sense, where in reality, the mines need to be nationalized. That should not be going to private profit run by oligarchs. So another crazy thing happened yesterday where the Swedish embassy posted that the Swedish company Evolution Gaming, they have this something called like Swedish Business Thursday or something, where they like highlight and showcase the Swedish businesses in Georgia. And so they did this like glowing, here's a Swedish business, Evolution Gaming. And they're like socially responsible, corporate responsibility, their gender, whatever, some kind of, feminist organization. And I thought that was, actually, I don't think it was a misstep, because I think they do know that the support is on their side and the workers don't have that much support. So I don't think it was such a risky thing, but it was quite interesting to see all the comments from the activist community. Not that many, but still being like, wait, Sweden's known for their like workers' rights. Like, Sweden is supposed to be this sort of, haven for social democracy. And here they are cheering on a company whereas, all these people have, from the mites and insects that bite them, rats run out of the building, like really bad health standards, really low pay, and exploitation of young people, and also like promoting gambling. So very eye-opening to some people who have been trying to make this into like an EU thing, right? So some people even ran around with the EU flag during some of the, the strike actions they did. This one person put up a picture, used the same picture that was used during the protests, to show the dark police. It was like the dark police on one side and the light-colored raincoats and so on of the EU, and to show the sort of darkness and the colorful. And they used that same image, saying the darkness was Evolution Gaming and the light, colorful people were the workers, but they also had EU flags in there too. And so this is a really great thing. I was telling Georgi, like, yeah, a friend of mine said that, well, despite the fact that the Swedish company is really doing horrible things to Georgian workers, Sweden itself has, they would never allow this. They have great conditions for workers in Sweden. And Georgi goes, yeah, isn't that called colonialism? So, yeah, because when you have, only perks and privileges and human rights and labor rights for yourself, but for the others, you do not, and you have two systems. Yeah, that's colonialism. So,
well, I just want to.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
also made a distinction that only US doesn't do the colonialism that way.
I just wanted to add one of the kind of incredible things about this was that not only is this capitalist who's able to exploit workers in Georgia, but that this capitalist has a geopolitically aligned embassy to back it. So actually, the the thing that Georgia has to deal with is that when money is invested in the country, it's immediately protected in certain ways from any kind of regulation, because that capital has a kind of geopolitical security blanket around it. And I think that this is something that we've seen with other companies in Georgia. Obviously, there's many cases. The Frontera scandal a few years ago, which maybe we can talk about later. But I was surprised to see that not only the Swedish embassy, the owners of the company coming out. Of course, we would expect that, right? But actually, the fact that the embassy itself was using its weight to say, you see how good Sweden is in Georgia. You see how good the EU is in Georgia. You see how good Europe is. And that, to me, is something that I think really needs to be examined, critiqued, and discussed more openly and honestly.
I could build up on what Brian was talking about. He mentioned the foreign capital that is coming inside of Georgia, and I would say that foreign capital is way more protected than even Georgian capital. And even going back to the UNM government, which had lots of problems with Georgian businessmen, they would close down lots of Georgian businesses, they would expropriate money, they would, I don't know, do all those kind of like crazy things with Georgian businesses. The foreign capital, foreign businesses were never under threat, even during the UNM government, and it didn't really change during the GD government. And that's because the foreign capital is way more protected. They cannot really touch it, even Frontera and other examples that we have. So yeah, and I also want to talk about that embassy post, and how kind of misinformed a lot of Georgian leftists are actually quite misinformed on what social democracy is. And I saw a lot of comments, and some of the comments were talking about, you guys are not Russians, you should treat us better, and rhetoric like that. And a lot of Georgians here, leftists, even think that this neoliberalism is a Russian phenomena, which is a crazy thing. They think that Russia is the one which exported neoliberalism into Georgia, and the fact that neoliberalism is a ruling ideology in Georgia is because of Russia for some reason, which is completely misinformed. And they're overall misinformed on what social democracy is that these European welfare states, they live well, sure, I don't dispute that, but they live well because they exploit the second and the third world through these corporations like the Evolution Gaming is. So yeah, and they thought that just because it's a Swedish government and just because their unions are strong in Sweden, they thought that the same thing would happen here. The same thing did not happen here. What happened here is that the Evolution Gaming started employing a lot of bodyguards to protect the buildings from the struck workers. And one of the workers actually in the interview said that the Evolution Gaming might solve unemployment issues in Georgia because they'll employ everybody as the bodyguards to push back against the workers. And that's a funny point. And
the thing is that,
so yeah. Oh yeah, Rezu, you were saying something?
the thing is that that is how social democracy has been presented in Georgia, especially in the 2010s. How the Social Democratic Party, when started with the revival of the leftism in the country, maybe we should do an episode about that because we don't have a leftist party, but the leftist culture is quite strong, and social democracy and Eurocentrist left has dominated the leftist discourse in this country, and therefore Europe has been presented something that is a guarantor of the welfare state, of social equality, of social and economic prosperity, and the Scandinavian model has been used as a sort of exemplary thing. Therefore, I really understand why people that call themselves or identify as leftists, though I rarely see them actually do anything leftist, what is helping the working class in general, but I digress for now. That's why they have been in awe. Also, these are most of the people who went on rallies and who prioritize European Union or waving the EU flag over anything that is concerned with their working class and what are the working class problems in the country. And history is the evidence of it, especially the history of the last 10 years.
Okay, let's move on because we don't have a lot more time. And do you want to say anything about the Georgia manganese?
I wanted to say something
Yeah,
about
go
Georgia
ahead.
manganese, because you also mentioned it. I just wanted to, build up on that. I think that nationalization of Georgia manganese is truly, at this point, is really the only solution to that. Because if you look at the miners who work at Chiatura or other, mining towns, we have a couple of them. It's been a problem since 2000 and I don't know, 4 or 6, something like that. They've been striking ever since then. There was like a research or an article done that it says that over like 10 years, at least 50 people died in the mines. So the working conditions in those mines are horrible. And I don't think that there's any chance of private corporation fixing those problems, because they obviously have to make profits, because the world economy is very competitive and Georgian economy is really not, so they have to exploit Georgian workers even more to win on the international market. um, while at the same time, we cannot just close down those mines, because first of all, it's very important for the overall Georgian economy, and second of all, those mines are very important to those like regional city economies, because those are like mostly mono-industrial cities. So if you close down the mines, then everything will collapse there. So the only real solution is really nationalization, and we've been talking about it for like a couple of years already. And even leftists kind of thought that, oh, it's too radical, and we just have to establish a socially responsible private entity there. It's just not going to happen. It just, logistics are against it. And one thing that this proponents of keeping the private company there say that they actually weaponize is that the fact that the owner is Ukrainian. Lots of Ukrainians started owning mines in, I don't know, Chiatua and Tribuli. Even in Tribuli, they own lots of businesses there. And in Georgia, you cannot really talk against Ukrainian business owners. And it's really funny because again, why usually the Georgian leftists say that Russia is the neoliberal state, but today, at this very moment, we have strikes against 2 Western companies. I mean, I guess we say that Ukraine is also the West. So it's not really the Russian companies that are the problem right now. It's the Western ones. But they don't really want to find a solution against them because they're from the West.
Yes, there's so much we should unpack about all the mining industry and who owns it, and also Frontera and so on. But it's become a huge problem where, in general, like you said, Brian, I think you said something like Western cloaked or protective cloaked businesses who get so many chances. If this Evolution Gaming or GM were owned by Russians, you would have the whole country protesting it because the opposition channels would be running it day and night, and all social media, university lectures will be telling the students that we're under attack and so on. But they don't say a word when it's workers against unjust bosses.
Actually, as a student, I can attest that university professors protected Frontera. When I criticized the Frontera case, the professors actually went against me. They were like, oh, Frontera is actually a good company that, developed Georgia, blah, 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 blah.
Not even people in the West say that. Like, Americans expose the Frontera themselves. It's insane. More Catholic than the Pope, Okay, so Rezi, we end with you, and then we'll be back on Monday to discuss more events and go. I think maybe we should actually discuss the economic approach by GD and all the other parties for the Monday episode. So why don't you just leave us with the new list that was unveiled by Georgian Dream.
Well, let me tell you, Georgi, who's not about the nationalization of Georgian factories or Georgian mines. It's definitely not the ruling party of Georgian Dream that has been in power for already 12 years. Georgian Dream came in power in order to unseat the then quite authoritarian, even by the United States Embassy standards, because they've declared them authoritarian, United National Movement and Saakashvili's party. And since 2012, Georgian Dream has been promising economic and social prosperity to the Georgian people. Somehow we are still waiting, and the minimum wage in the country is still 20 lari. Yeah, we have 20 lari. Imagine this. It's around
per month.
Per month, $7 or $8 per month since 1999. Georgian Dream that positioned itself to be a social democratic party or coalition when it came to power. Then it switched to liberalism. But now, when it has nothing else to offer, somehow they've changed themselves to become a conservative party. And they're against the gays and raging about the cultural, defending the cultural identity of Georgia and talking about sovereignty. However, if they want Georgia to be sovereign, somehow they do not offer anything, any tangible actions and any meaningful steps for Georgia to have economic sovereignty. And Georgia still is an import-dependent country, mostly on Turkey, Russia, and somehow, on some extent, even on the European Union. Unfortunately, nowadays, Georgian Dream is all about populism, and what it promises is the destruction of the great enemy that is the United National Movement. There are no real promises, and Georgian Dream does not even try to at least promise economic policy improvements, social mobility for the poor people, and etc., etc. Every time for the last 12 years, Georgian Dream had different focus, central focus for their campaign. In 2012, it was economy, prosperity, and unseating the UNM. 2016, it was constitutional majority, so they could change the laws and the constitution would serve better the Georgian people, but none of this happened. Then in 2020, it was about the monastery between Georgia and Azerbaijan border, an old Georgian monastery that Azerbaijan and Georgia have dispute over, and they said they would return this monastery after they would come to power. Unfortunately, that topic has been now, lost in the annals of the history. No one really wants to talk about it. And now what they offer is only the thing is that if they come to power, they would finally arrest the perpetrators of the crimes that UNM has done against Georgian people. Unfortunately, this is the only thing they offer. And what they do instead is they try to bring Bidzina Ivanishvili back to politics. Every time that the Georgian Dream has a crisis before the elections, Bidzina Ivanishvili returns to politics. Firstly, he's the richest person in Georgia. He was the first prime minister of Georgian Dream Party, but then he said that he would leave politics and just support Georgian Dream from behind. But Bidzina Ivanishvili had a huge influence and had huge support among Georgian people. He was sort of the face and the leader of the Georgian Dream coalition when they came to power in 2012. However, since then, Bidzina Ivanishvili has been accused to be a Richelieu-esque figure who was trying to pull the strings from behind, from the shadows. And in 2023, he returned to politics to become as an honorary chairperson of the Georgian Dream Party. And now he finally decided to enter into politics officially once again. He will be the number one on the party list of the Georgian Dream. Only 20 people have been revealed who are going to represent the Georgian Dream, because it's going to be a proportional elections, as we discussed in our previous episode. The second number is, of course, the current prime minister and the right and the left hand of the Bidzina Ivanishvili's political schemes, Irakli Kobakhidze, who has been very much loyal to Ivanishvili and has been doing all this he has been dealing with the NGOs protests against the so-called Russian law. He's been one of the co-authors of this anti-foreign influence agents bill, and etc. Number three is, of course, right hand of of Bidzina Ivanishvili, that is Irakli Garibashvili, who has been right hand of Bidzina even before, had been right hand of Bidzina even before they came to politics. He's been working with Bidzina's business, and he's been running Kartu Group, that is the association that is run by Bidzina Ivanishvili. They also have a Kartu bank, an investment company, and a banking system. Additionally, number 4 and number 5 are Imam Kamdinaradze, the majority leader of the Georgian Dream political party in the parliament, and number 5 is the current speaker of the parliament. So there are actually no women in top 5 of Georgian Dream. Actually, there are only 5 women in among these 20 people that Georgian Dream unveiled. Of course, number 6 is Teatsulukiani, that is a loyal supporter and one of the strongest leaders of the Georgian Dream. She is the leader of the party since 2011. And after her, she was part of the coalition, actually. She was representing Free Democrats, but after her leader decided to backstep Georgian Dream and leave the party, she decided to stay with Georgian Dream and leave her party and became actually the member of the Georgian Dream party, not the coalition. She was Minister of Justice for 8 years. Now she runs Ministry of Culture to keep everyone in the cultural sphere informed, and Georgian Dream to actually monitor what they are financing, because they've been actually financing some things that were led by, were used by NGOs and the opposition. But this is an issue of debate, and we can discuss it later. Additionally, Georgian Dream went and decided to include also 2 Olympic gold medalists, that is a weightlifter, Lashat Alakhadze, and Geno Petriashvili, who's a Greco-Roman style wrestler. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring popular figures around themselves, around the party list, trying to promote Georgian Dream as to be the only one that could bring peace and stability in the country, to avoid the war, to somehow try and low-key stabilize the relations and even maybe start negotiations with the Russian Federation, and therefore springing hopes that there might be any solution with Abkhazian conflict and the Ossetian problem as well. So this is what Georgian Dream offers. Instead of focusing on the actual economics, actual social policy, actual environmental policy, or other, they offer stability through the party list and stability through Bidzina Ivanishvili's return to politics, and they offer sovereignty not with real economic and industrial development that Georgia needs desperately, but through the figures, through populism, and through singing about the conservative values, and also assembling celebrities like Olympic gold medalists around them, because up to these Olympics, sportsmen have become very popular in this country. Also, some or less successful Georgian drum also in the UEFA 2024, and how Georgian Dream actually helped to prop up the Georgian football players as well. So that's what the Georgian Dream is bringing to the table for 2024 elections regarding the economy. It's not economy, but it's about bringing celebrities and Bidzina Ivanishvili. Any comments?
No, I would just say, like, do you think part of the problem is, like, no one's had a social kind of program for 30 years, you know, like an economic social program that could be robust, besides Bidzina, who tried to do the whole healthcare and, you know, I'm going to build factories. You know, there's a way that people's tastes and idea of politics is shaped by media for so many years that it's almost like when you bring in more serious issues and talk about, you know, economic and industrial development and so on, that those things are completely neglected by almost all media. The only thing they ever focus on is like things like that, like showy stuff, you know, like somebody's an Olympic medalist or this or that. And so it almost becomes difficult to have a more substantial political program in debates. And this is contributed by the opposition, Georgian Dream, and all the NGOs and everybody else who's in the system. Because again, very few people, were literally the only people, one of the only people, let's say there are a few others, who even discuss any social economic issues at all in, on media if we're ever invited. So do you think that's probably why they focus on these kinds of flashy things?
Absolutely, because Georgian politics has been characterized by things like that. And you should see what the opposition offers. For example, UNAM has unveiled its economic policy for the migrant workers. It says that they will create a President Saakashvili a foundation with 1 billion Georgian lari, and that will be distributed to the migrants to return to Georgia. So absolutely baseless, without any plan, just this kind of populist, flashy sort of a campaign wannabe policy, but that's not even a policy kind of thing. So basically, yeah, because no party has actually ever talked about socioeconomic issues. They only focus on international politics, foreign affairs, Russia, US, West, China, and things like that. There has never been any real discussion, even if there are any debates for the election, there's never a talk about, like, for example, pensions or healthcare. What they talk about is, you're a Russian agent. No, you're a Russian agent. No, you're a Russian agent. And this is the whole psychotic.
Traitor.
Or a Russian slave, or a fat Russian slave in some cases. So that's the whole crazy dichotomy in the Georgian politics. And actually, most of the people and working class is very much sick of it, and they say none of these political parties represent us, because no one really talks what we really need and what are our concerns. And also the polls show that the biggest concern for the people are socioeconomic issues, though most of the parties do not talk about it. They say, oh yes, these are the issues. We will just build 500 factories with foreign direct investments from the companies, like from United States and Sweden. That's all they say. That and done. It's like not even 2 paragraphs.
I just want to say one small thing, which is that I just want to add that I think this problem that you both outline about the inability of the Georgian political class to talk about social and economic issues, and the fact that every single poll that happens shows that the issues and concerns of the Georgian people are not represented by the political parties, is a deeper problem throughout the post-Soviet world, especially. We have a friend of ours who writes about this representation crisis that's been going on throughout the post-Soviet world, where there's this further and further distance between the political class and the population, and it actually prevents the ability for socio and economic transformation, and people get stuck in an opposition trap, right? So people are going to mobilize for opposition politics, and they can even mobilize for opposition politics in a revolutionary way without ever transforming the fundamentals of the society. And you see this in Russia, you see this in Ukraine, Central Asia, Armenia, everywhere. And so I think that the way it manifests in Georgia is how you outlined it, Rezi, calling everybody traitor, calling everybody Russian.
Any last comments, Gio? And we're going to close this because it's been going on for a while.
I can make the last comment and close it. About the Georgian Dream party list, it's just not really much to say, just very populist, and it shows that it's very populist, and it shows that they are trying to appeal to the conservative population more, by bringing these Olympians and like sports celebrities, because sports, especially in Georgia, like in this year, it got so popular. Everybody's talking about sports because there was Olympics, there was like a lot of football matches that some of them like Georgia won on the international scale, and yeah, it's a very hot topic, and Georgian Dream utilized that really well, and it will work in their favor definitely. but it's also disheartening for anybody who actually wants a policy and not just, some Olympian weightlifter sitting in the parliament. Not that I have anything against them. I'm very glad that they made our nation proud, but it's just, are they really the best choice for building a better nation? I don't really think that. Okay, so I can wrap it up now. Okay, this is it for the second episode. Today we began by talking about recent political changes in breakaway region Abkhazia and how these changes might progress and what kind of effect they'll have on Georgian elections. Then we talked about a new government program that intends to replace foreign donors as main contributors to NGO funding. Despite it being a standard procedure in many nations, lots of people from the opposition have issues with it. In this episode, we also covered the worker strikes against two Western companies and the role of foreign capital in Georgian markets. After that, Sopo explained to us the famous or infamous American Megobari Act, so far a bill, its real implications and how misrepresented it is in Georgia. And at last in this episode, we discussed the ruling party, its composition, electoral list, and the broader economic policies that they have. Thank you for watching, and for the next episode, we're planning to expand the party analysis to opposition parties and delve into the mess that is Georgian economic policy.
Thank you. Bye.